Happy New Year, everyone. Today is New Year's Day, 2024, January 1st. So, I have a lot on my mind that I have to share today. There is almost nothing better than a time machine. I think all of us would love to go back in time and see how things were in the world. Maybe see how things were here in Hansford County, or maybe you go back in time and see the Roman Empire, or you want to go see different events that happened throughout time when, Christ was walking the earth. Things like these. The next best thing we have to that is what we're doing here with these recordings. Made in 1974, made in 1996. Recordings of folks that built this county, that either they themselves were pioneers in building this county or their parents were. And this is nothing, just the only thing better is a time machine. Being able to gather this kind of knowledge and firsthand witness testimony to history in Hansford County, and how people lived, how people survived. This is episode 23, which is our first episode in the year 2024 to be published. And now that the holidays are behind me, I'm hoping that we can start scheduling some folks to start doing this again, making recordings of the folks who are alive today, who've been around the block, who have lived 60, 70, 80, 90 years here in Hansford County, or maybe they came to Hansford County a little later. This is the most valuable thing that we have in terms of learning where we come from, what made Hansford County what it is today, who were those folks. This is also just as good as a time machine, well, slightly less, but again, same thing. These history books, Volume 1 and Volume 2, we have bunches of these at the museum that we are selling. The reason that Holly and I are involved in the museum at such a high level, and now we're board members, is we want to preserve our history. Not just what's in these books, but what's in the artifacts there. And also preserving the history with people, with recordings that we're going to be making, plus just like the recordings that we're publishing today. If you want one of these history books, they're available. You just got to get in touch with us at Station Master's House Museum here in Spearman. We have them. We will sell them. And the proceeds go to the Station Master's House Museum to keep it open, to keep things going there. But these history books, for those who may not have seen these before, these are the stories of individuals over the years who came to this county and made their life in Groover or Spearman or Morse or any of the other communities like Oslo. These are individuals and their families. Some of these folks, we're hearing their stories on the radio, but their stories are also in here. So I encourage each of you, if you don't have these books, or you have family members who don't have these books, get in touch with us at Station Master's House Museum. We'll get these to you. We can sell these $50 a piece, or if you buy Volume 1 and Volume 2 together, it's $75. So there's a discount if you buy both of them. So we're going to listen to Olin Sheets and Gwenfred Lackey. This was recorded March the 7th in 1974. Gwenfred Lackey, we've already had a recording earlier this year, or earlier in 2023 of her, where she was talking a lot about her art. Again, Jesse Davis pokes into this studio in this episode and asked some questions of Gwenfred about her artwork. Jesse contributes for a while. He's there most of the time, and then he kind of leaves. Olin Sheets is there and tells a lot of stories about life, farming, ranching in Hansford County for he and his family, his ancestors. Toward the very end of this episode, there's one little talk about pandemics or an epidemic, the 1918 flu epidemic. Olin Sheets' dad passed away from the 1918 flu epidemic. I thought that was very interesting. That's right at the end of this interview. But there's a lot of fantastic history in this interview about adobe walls. You know, how Gwenfred Lackey learned what she did to paint her famous adobe walls painting, Battle of Adobe Walls painting. She's got some paintings in the museum today that if you haven't seen them, you need to come up and see them. She's a fantastic artist. And Olin Sheets is a great storyteller. So I'll go ahead and close out and let this episode begin. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for listening to these time capsules of history. And if there's anyone who wants to help me put together some interviews of people today, I've already been told by Holly Gifford and Linda Veneman that we could use the Old Hansford Pie Society, the pie shop here in Spearman, as a location to do this. I don't know what all I need in terms of equipment. I'm trying to look into that and research that. I don't even know what all that stuff costs, but I'm going to reach out right now and ask anyone that knows more than I do or thinks they can point me to some resources. I would certainly love the help. And thank you all so much. And Happy New Year once again.
Here with this morning's guests on Spearman Information, Coy Palmer.
Thank you, Dwayne, and good morning, everyone. Today's program is brought to you by Golden Spread Sales Company, and we really have a rich treat in store for you this morning. Tom Jones of Groover was to have been our guest this morning, and he was sick this morning and couldn't be here. We hope he'll be recovered very soon and be around to share his experiences of the early days with us. But just like all the old-timers, many old-timers came to our rescue immediately, and that's the way the people did in the olden days. They helped each other, and they're reminiscing about that this morning. We have with us Jesse Davis, who has come down to help us. Jesse's supposed to have been here, but he's been playing off on us. He's supposed to have been helping us with these interviews for some time, and we finally got his arm twisted. Jesse, good morning.
Good morning, Coy.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, and I would like to introduce our guests.
Good.
First, we have Gwenfred Lackey, who's going to reminisce a little bit with us. And then we have Olin Sheets, and I know both of them are going to have real good stories to tell us.
You bet. We've already shared some real beautiful stories of the early days, and we'll be back to talk with our guest and Jesse just as soon as this message is over from Golden Spread. And our guests are Olin Sheets and Gwenfred Lackey, and Jesse Davis is my co this morning. Jesse, do you want to start off with, you said you had a question you wanted to ask Gwenfred.
Well, I tell you, I think ladies are first, don't you?
Sure, always.
Always first. Gwenfred, is one thing that has always been in my mind since I've known you. I've seen lots of your paintings. Did you ever have any training in painting at all?
A little. I took some private lessons at Gaiman in 1909 and 10. It was just a teacher taught private lessons, and I've had very few, though.
Well, what is a favorite picture that you painted? I know you have a favorite.
Well, of course, my Battle of Adobe Walls. I was 2 years painting that.
Battle of Adobe Walls. I've seen that picture and have admired it very much. And I just kind of wonder where you got your material for that picture.
Well, just out of my head. My daddy Well, of course I had help. My daddy didn't think he could afford to give me art lessons at Guyman, but my mother, we slipped that in over him one fall, and I painted his pony he thought so much of and gave it to him for Christmas, and that was the first he'd known I was painting 2 months. So after that, he was quite proud, and he said, while you girls are wasting your time painting, why don't you paint something worthwhile? Paint this Battle of Doble Wall. And at that time, Mr. Billy Dixon was living, and I corresponded with him, and that's where I got my information.
Now, you went to the site, Gwenfred, and studied the landscape there and took pictures. You talked to a lot of people that had heard of the battle before, because you got so much action in that scene. There are horses everywhere ridden by Indians, and it's just a glorious, bursting thing with action, and it depicts the real battle that took place there. It's a reality. It's not an imaginary thing. And you must have studied that a long time before you ever got your oils out.
Well, not too long. My daddy took me down that summer. We went in the old carriage, 2-seated, with the horses, and we went down. I just made a sketch of that, and of course I just had to make up these Indians and where they were, but these letters from Billy Dixon gave me information about all the events that was in there, the old buffalo hides and the crow that was flying around, and he was flying around all during the battle, never lost a feather, they said. And all different things about this Negro had been with the United States Army, and he knew these, he was a bugler, and he gave these calls, and some of the men that were there, of course, recognized it because they'd been in me too, and they knew just what was happening.
Well, you must have had a world of information on that subject, because from all I've read and all I've heard, it depicts the scene perfectly.
Shows a tremendous amount of talent.
It sure enough does.
And of course, I think, Olin, it'd be nice if you told us who Billy Dixon was. Now, of course, all of us know we're taping these live broadcasts so that anyone who in years to come wants to refer to this talking history, it's called, I think, they might wonder, who is Billy Dixon? They keep talking about Billy Dixon, so why don't you tell us who he was?
Well, Billy Dixon was early day government scout for the Army, and then later, of course, he was a buffalo hunter. Now, he established the Doble Wall site. They came down from Dodge City and picked this location as a trading post, supply depot for the hunters. Well, later on, after he quit the service, why, he filed on this land at the old Dixon place now, which is a choice piece of land on the Canadian River. And he lived there a number of years. And he put out an orchard there of apples, pears, and peaches. And some of the old pear trees are living to this day and bearing fruit. More than 80 years ago, they put out.
And this is March the 8th or 7th, which is it? March the
7th.
March the 7th, 1974,
Yeah.
80 years later.
Yeah.
The Battle of the Doble Walls, I think, is history, and anyone listening to this can look that up.
Yeah.
But Billy Dixon did something in that particular battle that is memorable and put his name in history.
Yes. The Indians laid siege to those hunters. They killed their teams, their mules, the first thing. So it cut off any way of escape. Yes. Well, about the third day, after this battle, the Indians seemed to disappear. They didn't come in numbers to attack the post, but they knew there were Indians in the country, so they could see them in little groups around at a distance. Well, about the third day, they were just hemmed in there, and there was at least half a dozen Indians appeared on a point, a red point to the east of the fort called Dobie Creek. And it was, of course, 1st of along July, and the days where there wasn't a bit of breeze. And what appeared to be a chief come out there on this and cut some didos. They thought he was a chief by his headdress and the big spotted pony. Some of the men proposed that Dixon try a shot and see if he could hit this fella. Dixon had lost his gun a few days before in the Canadian River, but he borrowed a gun from Mrs. Olds. Her husband had got killed there, but he wasn't used to shooting it. But it's the same caliber gun, one of those big 50 caliber buffalo guns. And so he takes careful aim and considers the elevation, velocity of the wind, and he knocked this Indian off the horse, and evidently crippled him pretty bad or killed him, because they ran out and grabbed him and pulled him back out of sight over the hill. And then after that, they didn't seem to find any Indians in the country.
The Indians seemed to take that as a bad omen and left.
I think that's right.
And they had these hunters trapped there for several days.
Oh yes, several days. And
they were just going to starve them out.
Sure.
And this turned the point, so Billy Dixon, of course, has become a historical figure.
Some of the firearms men says that was impossible for that big, heavy caliber slug to carry that far, over 1,200 yards. No, it was over a mile, a little over a mile. But he did it anyhow.
And they had a lot of witnesses to it.
Sure, they did.
And it's been historically recorded several times.
Yes.
So, and I think Billy Dixon had his own book out regarding his early days, and particularly the Battle of the Dobie Walls. And that happened to have been the last major battle between the white men and the Indian before the Indians were put on the reservation, as I recall.
I think that's right.
I wasn't here at that time. No. You weren't either, were you?
Sure wasn't.
But you did know Billy Dixon, didn't you?
Yes. I remember when I was a small boy, we used to go to the orchard and get apples and pears. I remember that real well.
And at the Billy Dixon place?
Yes.
Which is down on the Canadian River or close to it?
Yes, a mile and a half south of the old Dobie Walls battle site.
Olin, you were speaking of Billy losing his gun in the Canadian River. That Canadian River had a bad reputation, or a vast reputation, for being very dangerous to traverse during those days.
Yes, it did.
When it was up with quicksand and so forth. Jesse, you're sitting there, I'm hogging the show. Do you have some questions now?
Well, no, I think you're doing a real good job, and Olin's doing all the talking, and it's very interesting.
I wanted to ask Olin some questions about the early days here. Last year we had a tremendously bad winter for this country. How about the early days? Do we have any winters like that in your early days?
Well, it seemed like, Coy, that when I was a kid, all the winters were bad because we had to be out, and it seemed like the snow was always so deep. But I guess they were mild winters then. But I know we did have some real bad winters.
What years are you referring to there?
Well, 1911 and 12, I remember stand out being a bad winter, and then 19 and 18 and 19. That was when the snow got so deep all over this country. And
well, you've gotten up into my era now. I can remember the snow of 1918. Gwenfred, you're shaking your head there. You want to add something to that?
Well, yes, 1903.
Well, she
We had one of those, and that was before these boys.
that sure was.
Was about like 12 and 18.
Now,
I went
where
through
did you
those.
live, Gwenfred, at that time, 1903?
At the
Come on a little
ranch.
closer.
At the ranch where Jolie,
It's south of Groover there.
yes, south of Groover, 6 miles. I was born there in 1894.
And the homestead house is still there.
Well, it's been remodeled, and he put a few boards of the old house back, and the house was original. It was a store at Farwell. Farwell was a little town near Groover, and some Illinois people came out to make a town, and they were there a few years. Of course, now that was before my time.
How did you keep warm in those days, in 1903?
We had coal and wood, a lot of wood. We had wood. We lived on the creek. And
You were on the stream, you had woods, but
Yeah.
Olin, there were places where you didn't have wood. If you didn't have coal, how'd you burn?
Well, people that live near the breaks, Canadian breaks we call, would usually go there through the winter and get wood, you know, dead trees and everything. And then we would depend on some coal. But people live back in this vicinity around Spearman. They had to depend on coal about altogether. And coal
There was
and
one
cat-
other commodity. I think
Yeah.
you're being a little modest. Gwenfred, go ahead and tell.
That's just what I said. I think he's afraid to say cow chips, don't you?
Well, I was fixing to get around to that.
Well, that was a main source of fuel in those
Yes,
days.
it was.
And, of course, did you have any buffalo chips still left in those days, Gwenfred? In 1903, were the buffaloes all gone?
They were all gone.
I guess about in the 90s was the last time we had so many buffaloes, 1890s. How about where you first went to school?
I went to school at two schools. The old McCoo school district was about 7 miles southeast of Spearman. I would go there part of the time, which is 7 miles from where we lived. Then part of the time I went to the Hope School, which the old schoolhouse is
It's still there.
Yes, and that was 9 miles. Of course, I rode horseback at both
I was going
places.
to ask how you got there.
Yes.
And I guess you had to start, an hour earlier than we normally start now to get to school.
Well, I'd start a little early, but you might say I pony expressed them across there. I never slowed down from a lope to a run, and I had 2 good saddle horses that changed about, and it didn't take me long to ride across there. There wasn't any gates or to speak of.
Were there any days that the weather was too bad to go to school?
Well, Coy, I went some days during the winter that some of the children that lived within a half a mile of the house didn't go. But I didn't mind the cold weather. I just thought I wanted to go, and I just pulled out.
When you got there, what'd you do with your horse? Did you have a place to put the horse?
We had a big at the Hope Schoolhouse. We had a yard fenced in there, and they turned the horses loose in order to keep them warm, you know, and
Let them graze.
Let them graze, and in later years, they built a little horse barn back west of that schoolhouse and corrals, and we had a shed for horses.
And actually, I guess you hauled feed up there so you could feed the horse.
Well, no, not anyone fed the horses. They just usually fed them good of nights and morning, and they just did that the rest of the day.
How about watering? Did you have a place to water them?
No, there wasn't even water. They
They just had to do without
until they got back. That's right.
But you did change horses about every other day.
Yeah, I'd change it every other day.
Boy, there's one question that I would like to ask these folks. We're talking about the winters, you know, in the past. Isn't it true that we'd do our butchering and hang our hogs and beeves out on an old windmill or big tree or something like that and leave it all winter? We can't do that anymore. But,
Part-time. Of course, my daddy was a butcher in Topeka, Kansas. He was just a boy. And of course, he knew how to put this in a brine. Now that was hogs, but our beef, of course, cattle were cheap, and we killed several through the winter, and would trade. I had an uncle living close, and we would trade a half, and then when he butchered, he'd pay us back with his half.
But we could hang them out for a long period of time.
Yes, they did.
We can't do that anymore.
No, it won't keep, no matter how cold it is.
Just hang it on the windmill tower platform or a large tree, and you could use a quarter up. Just
You know, that's an interesting thing. I wonder why the meat won't keep now, even if we had 6 weeks of freezing weather.
The humidity, if there's such a thing.
More moisture in the air.
Yes.
Wouldn't dry out as well. But I can remember seeing, when I was a youngster, a half a beef hanging on the side of a windmill tower. And I'm sure the hogs you cured out and put them in the smokehouse, didn't you, Olin?
Yes. Well, we had a different type of fly. We didn't have the blowfly here then. I remember when we used to dehorn big aged cattle. I've seen 3- and 4-year-old steers dehorn, which would leave a big cavity in their skull, and you would hardly ever be bothered with screwworms, blowfly. They'd just finally heal up, and we never had any trouble that way.
So nature seems to find a way for us to learn to take care of ourselves as we go along and get more complicated through the years.
That's right.
You told an interesting story before airtime. Jesse, do you have a question you want to ask before I get?
Not right now.
Okay, you're next. You told about your grandfather having some land down near Granite, Oklahoma, that he'd filed on, and or he bought it, I guess. Bought some land from a Methodist preacher down there. Tell us about that.
Well, of course, I just heard my mother telling about it. She said prior to 1900, sometime after 1890, they had 4 dry years in that part of the Indian Territory around Granite and Mangle. Of course, Granite wasn't there at that time, and people had trouble making a living. And this Methodist preacher had filed on this land where the state reform school is today. And times got so bad, you couldn't get any, wasn't any work, and so my grandfather Schaffenberg traded this Methodist preacher a team of brown mares and a wagon and a camp outfit for him to leave the country. He went south to the Fort Worth and Denver to get work, but he gave him a deed to that. Now it was a half section. It covered this whole mountain where the
Reform
is now. And then he kept it years and finally sold it to the state for $55 an acre, which was a big price those days. And that's the state put this reform school there.
So he came out all right.
Yes.
He probably, what would a team of horses been worth at that time? $500?
No, they'd probably been worth $250 with the harness and everything. Probably $300 for the entire works, the team and wagons. Yes.
So he made a little profit there.
Yes.
That was back in the 1890s when he bought it, and
yeah, he kept it until after 1900 somewhere. I don't know just when the state bought it for this reform school, but that's when he did sell it to the state.
Jesse?
Well, I just wanted to ask Olin, several days ago we were reminiscing and talking about a Cold Springs place up on Cimarron River, near Boise City. We have some mutual friends that moved up there about 10 years ago, and Olin has told me that he used to tramp around up there or herd cattle or something, and I'd just like to hear a little bit about that because these are good friends of ours.
Well, yes, I know where the Cold Spring location is. It is on the old Santa Fe Trail, northwest of Boise City, and it was a famous camping place on this trail. And it is interesting to see those trails, and the old trail ground is back up on the hill from this, and the ruts where the wind is blowed out and washed out is still in a big circle where they evidently trailed their wagons sometime.
Now, was that, you're speaking of the Santa Fe Trail, was that the stagecoach that came from east to west?
Well, later on, there was stagecoaches, but this was the old
The old covered wagon.
the old immigrant trail that come from Independence, Missouri to Santa Fe with trade goods, you see. They found a trade outlet for Santa Fe, well, you know, back 1820s and 40s. And this road that Jesse and I are talking about, that is the dry Cimarron route, the cutoff from the main Santa Fe Trail. The big trail went north to Arkansas and then cut across to Raton Pass and then down south. But this was a cutoff, and it was considered very dangerous on account of the Indians were pretty bad, and it had a lot of dry stretches of country. There wasn't any water. But
It had two dangers then.
you bet they did.
You'd run out of water and your animals would perish, or the Indians
Well,
would get
this place really we're talking about is called Cold Springs, and there was plenty of water there, and plenty of timber, and plenty of hills to hide behind.
Yes.
So if they could make it to there, they'd have a respite for a while.
There was a stretch of country after you came into Cimarron County and reached all the way across. There were several good watering places all the way across Cimarron County, and that's where that trail was. But before you reached the Cimarron, they had some dry stretches of country, and then after you left, went into New Mexico, there was some dry stretches. But water was more plentiful after you left the Cimarron County.
Now, we had a visitor in our studios yesterday afternoon, a young fellow, about 26 or 7 years old, represents United Press International, and he was talking about the modern day youth and the youth of the old, and he was disturbed because he thought that our youth now is really in trouble in comparison to what they used to be. What were the differences in those days, Olin? For example, you told us about a trip which was not out of the ordinary at all that you made, freighting for coal. You went to Texoma by yourself when you were 16.
Yes. Well, back then, boys were making a hand at 12 and 14 in harvest time, and there was a lot of young men, driving freight teams. I was driving a 6-up mule team when I was 16, freighting to Texoma, and
Was that six mules strung out?
yes, that's right. They all strung them out to be in the road.
And how did you guide it? Did you use a jerk line? Or
No, I never used a jerk line. It was just some kind of light lines for your leaders is all you needed. You didn't need any other lines.
And how long would those lines be reaching out to that front team?
Probably 30 feet.
And you didn't have lines on the other teams behind you?
Well, you would have a set of lines for what you call your wheelers, but you hardly ever used them. You just tied them up there somewhere, but just your leaders. And one interesting thing, Coy, was on the freight roads from Guyman to Texoma, those old horses, see, there wasn't any grade, it was just a wagon road going across the country and a set of
ruts.
Well, those old horses knew whenever they met another outfit, which was a lot of them coming and going, to pull over and give half the road. But you couldn't get those leaders to give all the road at all. They'd pull and give the other outfit one half the road, and that's as much as they'd budge. And they'd just pass just that much.
So you could reach out and shake hands with the guy
Yeah, a
you
lot of
meeting.
times they'd just pull up beside each other, shake hands, and pass the time of day and be on their way.
Now, you took this trip when you were 16, and you must have been 2 days on the road.
Well, I was gone 4 days altogether.
Yeah, but I mean going.
Oh, yes, 2 days.
So that meant you had to camp out
Sure.
by yourself.
Yes. Well,
What year was that?
Well, that was in June 19 and 18, First
Did you
day.
have any bad weather?
No, it was, that was one of the dry years here. It didn't rain all summer. So-
What was the occasion that time? Your mother's in Texoma. What was the occasion?
Well, that was, World War I was still going on, and coal was hard to get. And they usually got coal in at Texoma first part of the summer. If you waited till fall, you might not get any. Well, she decided we better go to Texoma and get 2 wagon loads of coal. So I just took 4 of the horses at that time and got some coal. They was ready for the winter.
And did you do your own cooking, or did she
Oh,
fix
yeah.
things for you?
Oh, they'd usually fix a little something to last first meal, or maybe the supper, but then after that you had to cook your own bacon and eggs, open up cans, whatever you wanted. Everybody carried a little camp outfit with them.
Did you camp close to a stream or
Oh
anything?
yes, stream or stock well.
So that you could water the team
Sure.
and also get water for yourself. Did you carry water on the wagon?
Oh yeah, everybody had a big
Water
brown jug, usually a big brown jug. You never thought going anywhere without some drinking water, even just going across in the buggy.
Now, I think this is interesting, Jesse. They had an energy crisis then. Did you have everybody trying to shoot the president and condemning all the congressmen and everything and marching on Washington to try to get their share of the coal, or did you just do the best you could?
I don't remember there being anything like that. I just did the best we could. Everybody, if anyone had a supply and they had sickness and they couldn't go to Texoma or Guyman, why? They just told you to come over and help yourself. They helped each other and shared
Wouldn't it
alike.
be wonderful if we had that same kind of feeling amongst all of us today?
That's right.
Instead of shouting discrimination here and discrimination there. I guess I'm going to editorialize a little, Jesse, but
That's fine.
I think that we have protected ourselves into oblivion by such people as Ralph Nader. And you didn't need people looking out for your rights then. You were able to take care of yourself.
Sure.
Gwenfred, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Maybe she doesn't agree with me.
Oh, yes, it is.
How about all the children worked in those days, I guess?
Yes.
We didn't have laws protecting you people, and you look like you've suffered an awful lot from it. How old are you, Olin?
I was born 1901.
1901. That makes about 73 then. Sometime this year.
Yes.
And I think you're going to live another 70 years.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
You look like you're enjoying good health.
I've been very fortunate. One thing I'd like to add, Coy, was when we moved to this country in the spring of 1904, there had been a large prairie fire all over this country. And my father had bought this land the year before, which he gave $1.50 an acre for it, this section. And they went to, he and my uncle, Ernest Sheets, went to Moore's Creek. There used to be a sawmill down there. The Wamos run a sawmill. They got this green lumber and built them some half dugouts. Well, they didn't get back to them in the spring, and in the meantime, there'd been a large prairie fire all over this country and burned everything off. And when we came up over the Cap Rock from the Canadian, from the old road come from Miami, Texas. When you got up over the Cap Rock, all you could see, I don't remember it, but my mother said all you could see was burned, all you could see. When they drove up to this old half dugout, and the fire had burned right up to the edge, but it was green lumber, and it was unfinished lumber, and had a lot of whiskers sticking around over it. She said it had just singed those little burrs off this green cottonwood and then just passed on.
They'd built it with cottonwood.
Yes, it was a green cottonwood.
How did cottonwood last in those days?
It lasted all right if you keep it off the ground. If it ever touched the ground, it'd rot. But if you could put it in dimension stuff and had a roof over it, it lasted real well.
And didn't warp too bad, did it?
No, not bad, but if it was out into like a trail fence, it'd warp. Every time it rained, it'd take another twist, and about like green cowhide.
It's real hard to drive nails into, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It just get real hard.
Gwenfred, I wanted to ask you, you were here in that time, 1903. Do you remember that grass fire?
Well,
Come on over closer.
I do, but it must have kind of, with all the firefighters, it missed, it got our north place. Now that's near Groover. But down by the ranch house, why, I guess they turned it, and it didn't.
Were there any animals that got lost in that fire, got killed in that fire?
Well, I don't remember.
You don't know?
Well, I remember catching antelope, a lot of antelope, and I don't remember seeing any burned, but my father said he'd find antelopes that would burned and crippled you, and they'd soon die, or he'd maybe shoot them. Of course, we had a lot of forests back there then. It seemed that a lot of those big forests started on Fort Worth and Denver in that Channing country.
That's
and
because they fired their steam engines with coal,
yes,
and the sparks would fly out.
But this one particular fire in here in Togo started in Indian, New Mexico, and burned from New Mexico all the way across the Panhandle into this country. And they got it put out in here around Range, Oklahoma.
That's thousands of sections.
Oh, yes.
Just across 3 states there, so
It's
to speak.
just, but there used to be a lot of big fires, but it was almost impossible to control. But along the creeks, they could backfire, and maybe have a stream or a rough country. But those old vast prairies here, you couldn't do much. Just fight the side fire is all you could
How
do.
tall was the grass in those days?
Well, it was all knee high, and on up to waist high. This red grass was probably waist high.
And that could catch animals. They couldn't outrun it so
Oh, yes.
fast. It's dangerous for human beings.
Oh, it would outrun a fast horse, a lead fire, what they call a lead fires. But,
Well, how did you protect yourselves against a fire like that? Did you build a backfire?
well, a lot of people had fire guards around the improvements. They kept burned out. And once the fire started, all you could do was to plow a fire guard and then backfire and keep it from jumping that.
I talked to one person many years ago that was caught fire like that and on a horse. And he couldn't outrun it, so he turned and ran through it as fast as he could.
Yeah.
And he got burned, but he saved his life.
Yes.
I guess that would be one way to do
That'd
it.
be one way. But the smoke would be so bad. A lot of time you'd be overcome with the smoke fumes, your horse, and you would too. Maybe the blaze wouldn't be so dangerous, but that smoke was very dangerous. I don't know, it's poison or something or another. And a lot of people ran through those fires, but a lot of bad after effects. Yes.
That's very interesting. Jesse, we're going to be back and talk to Olin Sheets and Gwenfred Lackey right after this message. Our guests this morning are Gwenfred Lackey and Olin Sheets, and my colleague Jesse Davis is getting ready to talk some more. So, Jesse, I think you have some things you want to ask here.
I only have one question I want to ask before I leave it with you. And I just want to know, well, we used to have a man that lived here that experienced one of those grass fires, and he lived until just a few years ago. But he was real badly burned, and I wonder what year that was that Mr. Kirk was in that bad grass fire. And he was living south of town, I think.
Jesse, I don't know, but it was around 1900, I think. I wouldn't say for sure, but it seemed that he told me one time it was around 1900.
Well, now, he was out plowing, breaking sod when this fire caught him, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He didn't have a chance to get to the house, so I understand that he turned his team loose and laid down in the fur and pulled some of that fresh plowed sod over him. And but he did get badly burned.
Well, he lived to tell about it, and he lived a long, useful life after that.
Oh, sure it did. You bet.
But I didn't know whether that was some of the fires you were talking about.
Well, yes, that's some of the same. We had any number of those fires in the spring of the year.
Yeah.
And the whole country was all grass. There wasn't enough fields to check those fires at all. There'd only be a small field out of 2 or 3 sections.
Olin, how about, did you have fences in those days?
Yes, everybody had some fences. They maybe have some of their land fenced for small pastures, but in this vicinity out here, there's open range. There's so much railroad land, and non-resident land was just open, and people had just let their stock turn out. Of course, they had certain watering places, you know, but there was fences, but on a small scale. They did have the fields fenced, of course, and horse pastures, but in the general way, they just turned their cattle and stuff all out on the
Where
road.
was the old halfway house located, between here and Notla, or here in Canadian, or Glacier, or somewhere down there? You remember that?
Yes, was a halfway house just at the end of the freighting days. But when I was a kid, the main halfway house was George Gearhart. I believe it was George Gearhart, and he had a half, which was just a few miles east of the old Notley store and post office. And I remember he had a lot of corrals, sheds. Now that was on the road to Canadian and Glacier. The trail turned to the right down there a few miles and went to Canadian, and then you went on to Glacier.
Glacier was a shipping point on the railroad at that time.
Yes, yes.
And I remember, I think it must have been about 1919 or 1920, when tractors first began to come out. I drove several Fordson tractors from Higgins. I worked for the dealer down there. And I drove several Fordson tractors to Old Ochiltree and Booker, and I never did get to Spearman, but I have driven about halfway from Old Ochiltree to Spearman on a tractor. That'd take a 2-day trip, too.
Yes.
How did you get back?
Well, we had old Model Ts to ride back in.
Somebody came after you.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you walked.
No, and I did want to mention that there were very few fences in those days.
Just strike out across the pasture. So
We'd have a race. I expected to be 5 or 6 of us to drive tractors at the same time. And those old Fords would run about 20 miles an hour, and they didn't have any muffler on them. And the one that could find the shortest cut across the pasture usually was the one that won.
And sometimes you might run into a fence you didn't know was there.
I don't remember ever running into any fences.
Olin, in the early days when farmers began to settle and ranchers, there were, at least we read stories about wars between ranchers and farmers. Did they have any of those up in here in those days?
Not that I remember.
No ill feelings?
No, they got along. Of course, I just remember the small ranchers, but I guess some of the earlier ranches, you know, Amarillo country, there was a little hard feeling, but in this country, there wasn't.
Did you ever go to Old Tascosa? It was still thriving at that time, wasn't it?
I never did go there while it was still a town. I went there just soon after Boys Ranch was established. But I do remember going there one time when that was Bivens' headquarters, LX headquarters, the old courthouse. I remember going there one time, but that was just real small.
Gwenfred, you went to school in Gaiman. What was Gaiman like? We ought to mention here, for posterity's sake, that Gwenfred was the queen of the Gaiman celebration here just a few years back, and a very big honor, and rode in the parade and so forth, and reigned over the whole celebration. What was Gaiman like when you were going to school there Did you say 1903?
1906.
1906.
It was just a small little town. I don't suppose it's over 500 then. And we started school up Pleasant Hill. That's up near the Wittenberg place. On the Gruber Road to Stinnett. And it was right there where we started there, and I was in the fifth grade when we went to Guyman. And we'd only have 3 and 4 month schools here, so my daddy, heard him talk to my mother one night and said, well, if these children get an education, we're going to have to move to a school. So he got interested in Guyman, bought interest in the bank, before that First National Bank, Texas County Bank, was later. And he moved us to Guyman, and we went to school there. I was in the 5th grade then. And then later, after finished there, I went to a ladies' finishing school, Liberty, Missouri. That's just out of Kansas City, about 10 miles.
Goodbye, Jesse. Thank you a lot, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday?
Yes.
No.
Tuesdays and Thursdays are your days, aren't they?
Right.
Okay, we'll see you next Tuesday.
Okay, Corey.
Thank you so much. Now, Gwenfred, what were the schools? You only went 4 or 5 months in the country school, so to speak, and when you got to Guyman, I wanted to ask you a question about the name of the county there. How did that get the name of Texas County? Was that in Texas or not?
No, I don't know how it got that name, but it was Beaver County. That whole strip was Beaver County, and they cut it into Cimarron and Texas and what's that other?
I've forgotten. Well, you know Olin?
What Beaver's in?
It's
Beaver County, it's
Texas,
Beaver.
and Cimarron.
Beaver.
Cimarron was on the west and Texas in the middle. And Beaver on the east. But it was all Beaver County one time.
Yes, I don't know. And it was just territory when we went there. In 1908, it became a state. And I remember how they celebrated.
Still called the Oklahoma Strip, I guess.
Yes.
In those days. And it became a state in 1908.
I think it was 1908. It was just soon after we moved.
I believe it was 1907, Gwenfred.
Well, it could have been 7 and 8.
The reason I remember, that's the year my wife was born, and she said that it became a state the year she was born.
Now, let's reach back a little further. There was a run for land at one time in the Oklahoma Territory. When was that? Was that after you were here?
Well, that must have been before.
Yes, before he was born.
Yes.
Before he was born. How about Gwenfred? Do you
I
remember?
wasn't born.
What you've heard people talk
My
about?
daddy and my uncle, that's Tom Jones's daddy and Blanche Tabor's daddy, they made that run, and my uncle staked where, now I've forgotten, Woodward. He staked out there, and then they took it away from him and made a town. I don't know how. And my daddy staked out a quarter. They were quarters. And they'd, leave by daylight, and some would leave earlier. They would find a piece of land they wanted, and that's what they'd make a run for.
To try to beat other people to it.
To that quarter.
And then drive stakes on it, and it was theirs.
Well, they'd squat, as they said there. And my daddy got a quarter and paid taxes on it for a number of years, and I can remember when he dropped it way back about 1900, he just quit paying taxes.
Wasn't worth the taxes. Probably oil there now.
Could be, yes.
Olin, do you remember hearing people talk about those days of the runs?
Yes, I remember talking about the run, but I don't. Now,
That was the last race.
in Beaver County, in Texas and Cimarron, they just filed on this land that was for settlement. They didn't make any run.
There was land here to file on at that time.
Oh, yes. You could file on, it's what they call a grazing act. You could file on 4 sections. But after 1900, there wasn't any of that land. Be isolated.
They didn't make any of those runs. But that was the last run.
In
And
the
that was
Oklahoma
it.
Strip.
Yes. They didn't make a run up here.
How about, let's get back to the conditions that a family grew up in those days. How many in your family?
Well, my mother and father, and then I had a brother that died quite small. There was 4 of us. My father, named John Sheets.
And you're related to some other Sheets here.
Oh yes, there's a lot of Sheets around here, and we're all tied in.
And you were farmers and ranchers all of your
Sure.
all your time. You still are, for that matter.
Well, yes, that's about all I know to do.
Well, it worked out all right for everybody. But now, very few fields in cultivation. What were the early crops that you did remember?
Of course, we raised some wheat, but principal crops were maize and calf corn, because it took a lot of feed for your work stock. And wheat wasn't worth, it was worth quite a bit, but it was hard to raise and had to freight it so far.
But the time you got it to market is pretty expensive.
Yes, it was, and people didn't farm wheat very extensively. It was just, I'd say maybe 150 acres would be quite a field, wheat, but it's mostly, sorghum was a big crop for roughness.
And that was raised for your own purposes rather than for the market.
Yes. And then cattle weren't worth anything unless you had something fat enough to ship to Kansas City. And that's the reason that people kept their calves and yearlings till probably 3 years old for steers, and they'd mature and get fat. Well, they would usually bring a good price in Kansas City. But cows, people just kept an old cow until she just used herself up. They'd just get another calf, and maybe she just died, because they probably wouldn't pay the freight to Kansas. An old cow wouldn't, because you didn't unload from Texoma or Guyman until you got into Kansas City. And
now you raised a lot of your own food. You had gardens.
Oh yes, everyone had a garden.
And you had chickens, which gave you chicken meat and eggs.
Had hogs.
Hogs and
beef.
And you killed your own beef, and you had milk. But you did have to buy a few staples, and you had to buy clothes. Now, where did that money come from? From what few cattle you could sell?
Yes, and then another good source. People had, there's always demand for work stock, horses or mules. The raising of mule colts was a big industry, because once you got those mules up and broke, they'd bring $400 or $500 a team. And people tried to raise some mule colts, and then they'd have, it seemed oats did real good here, and whenever they did produce, they had oats all over the place, and people would have colts to sell and feed, oats, and there's always somebody needing some horse feed or teams.
Let's go back to the Holt schoolhouse for just a minute. What kind of teachers do you have? You always had a lady teacher, did you not?
Yeah, yes, I remember. I don't remember any, just all man teachers there. We usually had a primary teacher, and then maybe a man, what we call a professor, in the higher grades, but it didn't.
And you all went to school in the same room, and different classes were held while you were supposedly studying and so forth, right?
Well, and now, this is the second school that's been built there. The old school was right south there, probably 50 yards. And it was just one big room, and we had a curtain that
draw through the room.
Now that's separated the primary grades from the high school, you might call it. And of course there was a lot of confusion at that. But now later on they built the schoolhouses there now.
Now one reason for that curtain was to divide the classrooms, but then you could open it up and have Sunday school.
Oh yes,
church.
Have a Sunday school and that, and then literaries, they had literaries there. Every 2 weeks, probably.
Did you have Christmas programs, a community Christmas tree?
Oh yes, every year, and that was quite a thing. And our Christmas trees would usually be brought out of the breaks, which would be only
cedar trees.
Yeah, 3 or 4 miles south there, you find abundance of cedar trees.
The whole community would meet on There after Christmas Eve and decorate the tree and
Oh,
put
yes.
the packages on it.
For a day or two, a day at least, for the Christmas tree program, and have it all fixed. Then have a program.
And Santa Claus came.
Yeah. Have oranges and apples then to eat.
And a few little packages.
Sure.
And you'd...
It didn't take much to satisfy a child then, because you just get a package or some little toy, and he was perfectly satisfied.
I think the most memorable Christmas present I ever got was a 25-cent knife.
Oh, yeah.
I treasured that more, and it sticks out in my mind more than anything I ever had at Christmas time. It cost 25 cents, but that was quite a bit of money.
Sure it was.
And it's the first knife I ever owned. And of course, every boy wants a knife.
Every boy had a knife, usually, and he had it sharp, too.
But you could do a lot with it.
You bet he
Make wood stock for slingshots and so forth.
Most all kids did a certain amount of hunting when they had to skin their skunks and their coyotes.
Did you have a trap line that you ran on, Olin?
Well, yes, but I knew better than to have a trap line when I was going to school, because I'd seen some of those boys that run the trap line and
You weren't very presentable when you got there.
mixed up with skunk, and they'd come in kind of late and get by the hot stove, and it would be quite a scent rise.
Sometimes teacher had to send them home.
Yes, that's right. They just got the foul. They just have to. They were kind of immune to it themselves, but you get around the warm room, it'll sure come out.
I'd like to ask both of you this question. What were diseases like in those days? Do you remember any epidemics, or how did you, you didn't have doctors at your immediate disposal? You couldn't just say, well, I feel bad, I'm going to the hospital. Gwenfred, do you recall any bad diseases that swept the country at that time?
Well, no. Pneumonia or something like that. But we had a doctor. But he had the first doctor walked to his patient.
And it
for
took
miles.
you hours to get to a
Yes.
doctor, didn't it?
And we didn't catch diseases, you know. There were few of us, we didn't have diseases, and we had measles, whooping cough, chicken pox, and all that after we moved to Guyman and with more people, you see.
Got
They
that
were
right.
only from about 8, about 7 to 12 was the size of our school. Our families were small up there, and
Yes.
we didn't go anywhere to catch something.
You weren't exposed like you are now. But now, Olin, what would happen if, say, you had pneumonia and you were 12 years old, and it would be hours, maybe a couple of days before you could get a doctor? Must have been some home remedies taking place.
Yes, there probably was. I don't remember, but usually those my father died of pneumonia, and I know they put him to bed. That was the main thing, just go to bed. And I don't remember any of the medicine they took, but as Gwenfred says, there's a lot of people died from pneumonia, from exposure, you know. And a lot of people had bad lungs, and maybe they just had one lung affected. Lived for years, but they had to be careful.
It's kind of a survival of the fittest.
Yes. My father died with the flu, and that flu epidemic in 1918.
Is there anything I've tried to probe, but no doubt I've left a lot of things unsaid or unasked? Anything that you think of that we ought to put on this tape for posterity's sake, either one of you? Gwenfred, we appreciate so much you coming down and being our guest again.
Thank you so much, but I don't want to come, and when I get here, you can't stop me.
Well, I love that.
But I did want to add about the prairie fires. We had a lot of them, and when we would see smoke, our men would get on their horses and a broom and take off, and sometime they'd be gone 2 days, or they'd go all the way to Coldwater or past to help.
Help the other people.
Everybody helped.
Everyone had to help each other
Yes,
to make it.
and we had a lot of fires because there
Whenever-
wasn't anything to stop them.
Whenever you saw that white smoke rising in the horizon, that was a sure sign
of trouble.
of trouble, because this grass produced a real white smoke, unless it got into dense foliage and stuff, and then it would be more dark. But whenever you saw that white smoke rising somewhere, it was sure sign of a prairie fire.
Now, the way they fought it was with
Brooms.
brooms and toe sacks and that sort of thing, try to smother it out.
Yes.
Didn't have water enough to wet a toe sack like we do nowadays. You know, have a barrel of water in your pickup and soak the sack. It was just a dry sack. But everybody helped.
Some of the early ranches, I never did get into that, but I've heard old fellas talk about they'd go out and kill a beef and cut it right through the middle, and put the flesh down next to the fire, and put a man with a horse inside of the fire as long as he could, and went on outside and dragged this beef carcass down. And it put out a lot of fire because it was, is heavy in moisture. And then you could take someone come along fighting out the little straggler fires and a lot of good. But I never did get in on that.
Well, I heard.
Go ahead,
Pardon me.
Gwenfred.
I was going to say, I've heard of that just recently, and I never did hear it before.
Well,
I've never heard that they used one until just the last year or so. But it sounds reasonable.
Sounds reasonable, sure.
yes, I used to work for an old man on the Cimarron River, and he said they had put out a lot of fires that way. It'd take, on level country, you could put out a lot of fire. Of course, you had to change horses in that fire pretty often because the heat would get a horse's hoofs, and he'd seen a lot of horses ruined by keeping them in there too long.
Olin, people had to have fine horses in those days. Were they purebred, thoroughbred horses, quarter horses, or what kind of horses they have?
Well, they had a little of every kind. A lot of it was predominantly steel dust, mixed maybe with Morgan and some Percheron. But steel dust seemed to be a tough breed for this country.
Where did the steel dust breed come from?
Well, I really don't know where it originated, but from the east, and we had a lot of steel dust in this country come from East Texas. And I remember one particular horse that my father had was a big white horse. And he got him in Indian Territory from a fellow named Crow. And he was branded a bird on the left hip, just like a crow. And he was a tall horse. But I don't know what breed he was, but he could run over a coyote. He could just run up on a coyote.
Very fast.
Yes, and about the last small bunch of antelope that came across, antelope used to come across from the Canadian breaks, probably right through here by Spearman. I know this particular band did, and stay a while on the Palladur, and then they'd range back across to the Canadian. Well, my father and two other men, they decided they'd have some fun and chase these antelope. There was about 20 in this band, and they had relay horses about halfway between about where Spearman is and the breaks. But my father, he hazed this bunch of antelope, right? He hazed them in a way that they turned. When they seen they couldn't get through this fence, why, they turned, and all they know to do was just to go back the same way they went. And he got them turned, and took these antelope right down through these fellas that was there on horses, and they had a 6-shooter piece. And they poured in.
We called them, started coming in, they started fencing, and he had these just out on open range. 1903, he sold the bunch to an old man by the name of Starkey at Sayre, Oklahoma, and they drove them through. And he raised saddle horses and sold good horses for after he would have, we'd have a man to break them, and $60.
$60.
And I think these mares probably sold from $10 to $20 that he, and the old man stayed all summer with us with a team and an old wagon making this deal.
It took all summer to make the deal. That's correct. Our guests this morning have been Olin Sheets and Gwenfred Lackey, and we certainly appreciate their time in reliving some of the olden days. Our program was brought to you by Golden Spread Sales Company. And Tom Jones was to have been our guest this morning. We hope that he'll be able to be our guest sometime next week. Tomorrow morning, we're going to talk to Ernest Newcomb, an old-timer here, and he knows about wherever gas line and every water line and every sewer line and everything else has been put in Spearman. We're going to relive a lot of the olden days of Spearman with Ernest and other times. Hope you'll be with us. Thanks once again to Jesse Davis for coming up with us this morning, and to our guests, Olin Sheets and Gwenfred Lackey. And this is Coy Palmer saying, have a happy day, everybody.